All right, so it's 6 o'clock, so I think I'll slowly get started. I want to thank everybody who's here, both the organizers from AIR, American Institutes for Research, and also from UTSA, the University of Texas at San Antonio. I also want to specifically thank our visitors today who are joining us, even though we cannot necessarily see all of you. And I'm also very pleased that we have 3 speakers tonight to start off our kickoff event of the University of Texas at San Antonio and American Institutes for Research Pipeline Partnership Program. So as we were talking just a few moments ago, some of you may have heard that we started a process of talking about pipeline partnership about a year ago, maybe a little bit longer. And our initial plan had been that we would actually have a series of researchers coming to the UTSA campus this spring. And so we were very eager nonetheless to get started in this program, which we're hoping will last for many, many years. And this is our inaugural discussion about the ways in which we can explore different career pathways for researchers. Before we start with the organized component of the program, I just want to share with you a couple of features of Zoom. And now, of course, my own cursor is not moving. So hang on one second. There we go. And so in particular, later on, there's going to be an opportunity for our guests to ask questions. And we're going to ask all questions through the chat box. If you look at the screen right now, you'll see in the bottom, in the center, you have an opportunity to be able to see who all the participants are on the call. And you also have another small box that's called chat. If you click on that, it will open a chat window for you. And so we have several people here who are going to help to read the chat. And then when we get to questions, I'll be reading out the questions. So if you do have a question, if your own name is not appearing as you're typing in your name, if you would give your name. And if you would like to ask a specific person a question, if you would type their name in as well, and otherwise we'll just open the answer to the question to the 3 speakers. I think that's really all the features that people would need to see here on this screen, except if what we're also going to ask, let me move on then. We're going to ask that everybody mute your microphone unless you are speaking. And so there are going to be quite a few people on the call who will likely never unmute. And that's particularly important because we all have children and dogs and cats and cars driving by and that sort of thing, so that we can have as much quiet as is possible. The next thing is, as I just mentioned, please use your chat box to post questions or comments, and please be patient with the moderators, that's me, and one another as we're asking questions. We do have some limited tech support, and that you can actually either send a chat box message if you're having some problems, or if you're having problems and you can't find the chat box, you can email Simone Nickham. And I apologize, you probably can't see her name, but she is the person who sent you the Zoom link. So if you're on this call, you have her email, simone.nickham@utsa.edu. And also, just as a note, so you know, this session will be recorded. So if there are some individuals who weren't able to attend tonight, they'll be able to listen in the future. So as I mentioned, we're going to have 3 presenters. I myself am Juliet Langman. I'm serving as the moderator today. I'm the Associate Dean for Graduate Studies and a faculty member in Culture, Literacy, and Language in the Department of Bicultural Bilingual Studies at UTSA. Dr. David Myers is the President and CEO of the American Institutes for Research. Dr. Marta Tienda is a professor of demographic studies, sociology, and public affairs at Princeton University. And she's joining us today from beautiful Austin, just up the road. And then finally, we have our very own Dr. Rogelio Saenz in the Department of Demography here at UTSA. So I will hand the microphone over now virtually to Dr. David Myers. And David, if you'll just let me know when you'd like me to change the slides.
Okay, thank you very much. I have to say, I'm really excited for this to get underway. The This is the first of 3 universities that are engaging with AIR in the pipeline program. And it's been a fair amount of time in the making. As a matter of fact, the idea for this actually goes back probably 5 or 6 years to Dr. Nancy Cantor, who is the chancellor, was the chancellor at Syracuse, and is now the chancellor at Rutgers, Trenton. Not Trenton.
Newark.
Newark, thank you. I used to get off at the Trenton train station all the time when I went to Princeton. That's why it's stuck in my head there. Anyway, Dr. Cantor had the idea of reaching much farther down in the pipeline and building a pipeline rather than just trying to recruit people to create a more diverse and inclusive environment in organizations such as AIR. The idea, it literally kind of sat around for a few years. And then about a year and a half ago, we decided that with our resources, we could actually do this on our own. And we now have Howard University, UT San Antonio, and Georgia State participating with us. This is really the big kickoff meeting for us as well. So what I'd like to do is give a little bit of context about what AIR is about, and a little bit of an idea of the kinds of work we do. Because the ultimate goal, I have to say, for us is to have a strong pool of potential candidates that would like to work at AIR in the end. And if you don't work at AIR, we'd love it that you go into the field. And this is our effort, in a sense, to give back. So if you can go to the first slide beyond that. So just a little bit of background. AIR started over 70 years ago. It was started by an IO psychologist named Flanagan. Flanagan was at the University of Pittsburgh at the time, just coming out of World War II. He created an interesting logo for the organization. I don't know how many people are familiar with Pittsburgh, but they have what they call the Cathedral of Learning there. At one time, it was the tallest building. Yeah. And I'm looking around my shoulder because I have a young dog who was chewing on something, and I'll have to ask him not to. And the Cathedral of Learning is part of the logo. The smokestacks represent technology, but that was really Pittsburgh at the time because of the steel mills. And there's an airplane flying across. That was his first client, was TWA. AIR has progressed a lot since then. We're now a large organization. As of yesterday, I can say we're about 1,500 or 1,600 employees. We just almost completed an acquisition yesterday with another organization, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. What really drives AIR is its mission, and we'll talk about that in a second, but you'll see important words like evidence, using the best science for the organization. So why don't we go to the next slide. There we go. So here's AIR's mission, and actually this mission statement's quite new. It's only been out for the last month relatively, or roughly, and it's the same spirit as our old one, but I'm going to read it to you. AIR's mission is to generate and use rigorous evidence that contributes to a better, more equitable world. And that's what truly drives this organization. The board is very behind this. They press us all the time on this. And everything that we do is to honor this mission and to try to achieve it. Okay, why don't we go to the next slide? Okay, and those of you who are familiar with organizations, we often have a vision statement. And the vision statement tells you how you're going to get to the mission, how you're going to achieve it. And you'll see here, AIR's vision is to be the premier research, evaluation, and technical assistance organization, guided by principles of ethical decision-making, collaboration, inclusion, and innovation. We go on to say that we will inform improvements through education, health, and workforce development. We'll collaborate with organizations and policymakers and practitioners to adopt evidence-based practices. We'll partner globally and locally with other organizations and communities. And we will integrate our expertise in substantive policy arenas, research, and implementation. So this last piece here, and we're going to have a special slide on this, talks about how AIR thinks about its problem. And I think what makes AIR unique among organizations. But you'll see that the key things here for us is we want to affect change through education, health, and workforce development. We want to work with others in partnership, and it could be UT San Antonio, for example. And let's go to the next slide, and here's the critical piece there. Oh, commitment to diversity. We're a little out of order. Can you skip to the next one? And I'll come back to this. So the last bullet really, I think, epitomizes how AIR thinks about solving problems. We have strong content expertise at the core. And we apply strong research and evaluation to generate evidence. And then just generating evidence from our perspective isn't enough. You have to do something with it. You have to work with people. People have to want to adopt evidence-based practices. And we know in this world today that, not every policymaker relies on evidence. And I'm not picking sides here at all. It's been this way for a long time in terms of getting people to use evidence. It's difficult. But we see it as you start with the content, you design strong research and evaluation studies, you learn from them, and then you take that to the field and you work directly with grantees, school districts, schools, hospitals, whatever it takes to get them to adopt those methods. And I think this makes AIR unique. There are a lot of organizations that have strong research and evaluation skills, but they don't have much in terms of implementation. And so they only get one piece of this. But we see this all arising out of being smart about the content and working with smart people, often in universities, that give us that background, take our strong research skills, and then eventually take it into the field. So this is what I think differentiates us, and this sets the culture of the organization. So why don't we go back to the diversity slide now. So you've heard me talk about mission, and AIR, and Karen Francis is on this evening with us. Karen Francis is our Director for Diversity and Inclusion at AIR. I have to say, I've been the CEO, this is my 10th year. For 20 years, diversity's been really important to AIR, but I don't think we understood the inclusion piece. And probably in the last 6 or 7 years, we've learned about the importance of not only having a more diverse workforce and working with people with strong cultural backgrounds, and they bring those perspectives to the table, one also needs to be inclusive as well, because it doesn't do you any good to have just a diverse labor force. You need to be inclusive. You need to be accepting and respectful of these diverse cultural perspectives. And bringing on Karen and our previous Director of Diversity and Inclusion, I think really moved us that way. And why do we believe this is so important? It's nice to have a more diverse workforce, but the real reason is you come up with better solutions when you're in a diverse and inclusive workforce. And that's why it's critical to us. So now why don't we skip to, I hope nobody sees my dogs back there playing with each other. The kinds of work that we do. And as I said, we do a lot of work in education. That's probably, going forward, it'll be about 60% of our work. We also do quite a bit of work in the health space and in workforce development, and in some other areas as well. But those are the three primary fields we look in. If you look in education in particular, I think that's where we have our greatest depth today. We address a number of subjects. For example, special education, which is probably one of our strongest areas. Socio-emotional learning, David Osher there. Many of you may know David. We do a fair amount of work in income security in developing countries. In the health space, patient engagement. We do work in juvenile justice as well. And there are a variety of other areas that we do work in. This is particularly responsive to sort of the federal the federal market, where we apply our skills. Hold on a second. Boys, hey. Too much in the background. Anyway, so we do work in a number of areas. This is very challenging, obviously. It's like a news reporter and your child's walking through the room for you. But we do work in a variety of areas. We also do a fair amount of work with foundations like the W.T. Grant Foundation, the Gates Foundation as well. So why don't we go to the next one? Let me tell you a little bit about the partnership program. And I have to say, this is evolving, and it is very much trying to meet the needs of each of the universities we're working with. And it will probably change over time as the universities' needs also change, and we're trying to adapt to it. But the basic idea is that we would like to see more diverse candidates coming out of universities with strong backgrounds who are interested in working in an applied setting. I know when I came out of graduate school, Marta and I are probably similar generation, I was discouraged from going into an applied setting. As a matter of fact, I was told by my dissertation chair, don't mention it to others in the university that you're interested in going to an applied setting. They won't pay much attention to you because you're not moving into their space. But I persisted. 40 years ago, I got my PhD in sociology, and my background was in demography and statistics and methods, which I found interesting here. There are a number of people here that are interested in demography. But the idea is to provide resources that the university, the departments believe can strengthen their program through our resources. And it could be workshops that are offered. You know, for example, I know Marta is, you'll hear from Marta in a few minutes, she's very interested in contributing to this as well. Larry Hedges is interested in offering his workshops on randomized control trials. We have Claude Steele, David Hayes Batista, Michael Stoll, Camille Charles. We have a number of people who are external fellows, all with national, really worldwide reputations, who have committed to helping us, as well as AIR staff helping as well. And with that, I am going to end this so that I end on time. Thank you, Juliet.
Thank you very much. So there's one more slide that we'll share with you later. But what I'd like to do now is introduce our first expert voice from the field, Dr. Marta Tienda.
Thank you. I'm going to start my little my stopwatch. We were asked to answer some questions, and what the most important was what got me interested in policy research. It may surprise you, I enjoyed reading your bios and what your interests were, that I was trained as an undergraduate to study literature. I was going to be a Spanish teacher because, you know, that's a venerated profession. Nobody in my family had any college, and this was a big expedition. So I was majoring in Spanish literature and English minor. But something happened in 1971. I got an internship that put me in the field certifying migrant farm workers for food stamps. And that changed my life. It was a big turning point because the migrant workers weren't just them, it was me. I had been in the field in Michigan as a child because, you know, we didn't have food on the table or daddy was laid off. And so for me, it was like, oh my gosh, look at these challenges. I had no social science courses, but there were problems to be solved and I gave it my all. I came back with this, I told my professors, gee, I'm in the wrong field. And the answer was, Señorita Tienda, it will go away. Those 4 words I've never forgotten, but it didn't. The rest is history. And then I took a job when I graduated. I got a job offer as teaching. They were scarce those days. And I turned it down to take a job at Michigan's Cooperative Extension Service at Michigan State, where I was assigned to work with Latino populations. And I learned right away that I was a BA with green behind the ears, and all these other people were PhDs. I was assistant to the director. And I thought, you know what, I'm just kind of an appendage here, and I have to get some more training. So what happened was that Ford Foundation gave me a scholarship to study Spanish literature at UT Austin, which had the best program in the country at the time. And I got there and I said, I need to change fields, which I did. I was fortunate that I was able to transition into sociology and economics and demography. So I learned that I needed those tools. I was able to get them. And a course that I took with Harley Browning, he became my mentor on Mexican society. Then he said, well, I do demography, and I learned demography. It was just serendipity playing its, continuing to unfold. It was tough because I had no statistics training, no econ courses, none of the methods courses. But you know, everybody is teachable, and I think that's what's so important about our mission as educators and researchers. So the first job I had was at UW-Madison. In sociology, and I had a joint appointment with the Extension Service. But what was interesting is that I was affiliated with the Institute for Research on Poverty. They were interested in the Hispanic population. They had been doing all this work on inequality by race, but they said there's this growing population, the Hispanic population. Can you involve this woman? And so that sort of opened my eyes to applied policy research, because the Poverty Institute worked directly with the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation. So we got our marching orders from them. We did the research, but they didn't tell us what to do. We just did the research following the scientific methods. And then I got my job. I went to Chicago for a decade, and then went to Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs, where I have affiliated through the Population Center. Next slide. So I've explored several topics that are of interest to many of you. I did do some work on bilingual education early on, so I know several of you have that in your basket of interests. But what I've done in the 3 areas of education, workforce, and health, which are some of the big pillars that AIR works in, is college access. And this is something that happened once I got to Princeton. I had basically worked on school to work transition. I'll tell you about that shortly. But when I got to Princeton, the former president, who was former president of Princeton, who at the time was president of the Mellon Foundation, knew that there was going to be this big challenge to affirmative action, and he was trying to mobilize different researchers to try to get involved in education and racial and ethnic differences. And so that's one of the big themes that undergirds most of my research, is racial and ethnic differences in equity and access. And so he asked me to think about these questions on access to higher education. And then the Ford Foundation contacted me, and the next thing I knew, I was doing an evaluation of the Texas Top 10% plan. So if you want to look at, there's a whole website that you can still find on Princeton. It's the THEOP, Texas Higher Education Opportunity Project. Notice I didn't use the word affirmative action or any of the buzzwords that would get people excited. It was about educational opportunity in Texas. So that took over a decade of my time. It continues. Every time there's a hiccup on college access, we get a lot of requests for the data, but it's all available online. And then in that process, because of the Mellon had reached out to me to think about affirmative action, I also did some work on evaluating test scores and college and class rank, and the relative importance of each of these in providing access to college. The bottom line was that we don't have a meritocracy. We have made test scores as if they were the key for admission, when in fact kids, and the Texas plan showed this as well, young people with high test scores, with lower test scores, but higher class rank actually perform better than their counterparts. And this is true in national data as well as in the Texas data. I also looked at the school to work transition and how young people access the labor market. I was interested, I had studied, written a book on the Hispanic population, and I knew what happened, that there were these big racial and ethnic differences in wages and in access to the labor market. But how did it happen? And the answer, we asked, well, when does it emerge? And so the work on the school to work transition, I began to use longitudinal data analysis to compare Blacks, whites, and Hispanics. And I learned that Hispanics entered the labor market early, but they worked part-time, oftentimes more than part-time, and they didn't go on to college. Whites got some job experience, and they went to college. So they got both experience and more education. And the wage disparities were basically driven by those early adolescent decisions. And that we testified before the Congress on that. I've looked also at gender disparities in race and ethnic in comparing immigrants and non-immigrants as well. And finally, I've done some work on early childbearing, its health, the health consequences of early childbearing when I was at University of Chicago with the with all the work on the urban underclass and the focus on so-called premature childbearing and the consequences for single parenting. And I've done a couple of other papers on early sexual debut, comparing immigrants and natives, and showing how nativity can actually be a protective factor to prevent that. And finally, currently, you may be surprised, I've started to do some work on adolescents, and I'm doing a study on forming romantic relationships that was administered on cell phones. And we're comparing the quality of relationships that are performed online and offline. We've done some work with Sarah McClanahan's Fragile Family Survey, which is where my sample comes from. And we're tracing the emergence, the evolution, and the consequences of adolescent childbearing, trying to shift the focus from a risky behavior to the healthy parts of adolescent development. So that's kind of three broad areas where I'm researching. Then could we go to the next slide? So how have I connected my work with faculty research? So the fact that I was linked to the Poverty Institute at Wisconsin gave me an entree to the Office of the Secretary of Health and Evaluation. My first grant came from the Department of Labor, and these the research, when they're initiated through some government agency, they actually want the report, and they often result in testifying before the congressional committee. So I did testify to the Texas legislature when they were considering altering the percentage plan. They were stuck. They didn't do it initially, but they had to alter it eventually. And I've also served on many commissions, like the Census Advisory for Population Statistics. At the time they were going to launch the 1980 census. That's telling you a little bit about my age. But I was on this on the board when they were trying to decide about measurement of the Hispanic population. I served on those committees as well. And the U.S. Binational Commission on Immigration Reform, that was between the U.S. government and the Mexican government, formed this big study to try to inform immigration policy. But then 9/11 happened, and many of those recommendations went down the tubes, or they were put on a shelf until we get some leadership. And currently I'm serving on the board of the Urban Institute and the Holdsworth Center, in addition to being proudly a fellow of the American Institutes for Research. I'm an external fellow, and I'm really excited to be with you today. So the Holdsworth Center is here in Texas. It's the Holdsworth Center for Excellence and Education Leadership. So I will be able to serve with Ruth Simmons, president of Prairie View, Texas A&M, and former president of Brown University, chairs that board, and we're trying to upgrade the leadership of Texas public schools in order to increase student outcomes. And the Urban Institute does a lot of policy relevant research in areas of education and policy, like AIR, health, housing, finance, and also labor market. So there's a lot of alliance between the work of AIR and the Urban Institute. And with that, I'll stop.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tienda. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Rogelio Saenz.
10 minutes.
And Rogelio, we cannot hear you.
I was trying to tell myself, don't forget to unmute. I grew up in South Texas, in the Valley area. I think I share origins with Marta. Marta has the Valley origins as well. Little town Mercedes, a couple of towns from where Marta grew up. And really, I think that really set my values and what I wanted to do when I went to college. And when I finished high school, I went to Pan American University. And a little bit on the Valley area, Marta has mentioned about the farm workers were a major component, people who were seasonally going across the country to pick crops and so forth, and then many coming back to the Valley. Very high levels of poverty in the area, high levels of inequality. Even though Mexicanos, Chicanos were about 90% of the population, most of the communities hadn't had Latino or Latina mayors or city councils. The teachers were predominantly white and so forth. And so in this Chicano movement that took place during the 1960s and 1970s, there was a lot of the political consciousness and also trying to come up with efforts to improve the conditions of the Chicano population, particularly there in the area. And when I went to Pan American University, then I found social work. So I became a major in social work. And then I found sociology and really fell in love with sociology and double majored. And within sociology was taking a course on the demography of the Southwest with Manuel Lopez, who was a professor of mine, and he was the one that introduced me to Marta way back when I was a graduate student. But it was a class that really opened my eyes and showed me the value of census data and how it could be used to measure and describe inequality, understand ways of trying to improve the lot of our population and so forth. When I went to graduate school, I didn't know where to apply, so I ended up going to Iowa State University, which I had no idea where it was. And I was lucky that I received a research assistantship working at the Iowa Census Services, and that provided me an opportunity to write on population matters. A number that I remember was 2,913,808, and that was the population of Iowa in 1980. And 0.9% was the overall Latino population at that time. And then I went to Texas A&M University in the Department of Sociology, as well as for a time in rural sociology. And there I continued my work writing on population issues. I was working, colleague Steve Murdoch, who was at the Census Bureau for some time, the director. And we were working on population projections, how the Texas population was going to be shifting, and we're talking about the mid-1980s. What we were projecting was that there were going to be these changes that now are taking place. And I'll also work on socioeconomic disparities and Latinos and African Americans, and how you have these inequalities that continue to be major issues in the state. And there I also collaborated with Population Reference Bureau from the 2000 census, the American People Series. I wrote a report for them, and then they invited me to write on population issues for its website. And then I've also been associated with the University of New Hampshire Carsey School of Public Policy, and then here in San Antonio in our own College of Public Policy. Next slide, then. And then, so the three topics that I've explored with respect to education, I've worked on issues having to do with the demographic shifts and how you're seeing the impact on higher education. And over the last decade or so, we've seen a significant decline in the white population and even in the African American population. And at the same time, you see Latinos driving a lot of the growth that is taking place in higher education. Particularly in community colleges, where you still see that we're heavily represented in community colleges. Work on the intergenerational, kind of the reproduction of inequality, and work that shows that those where you find in communities where you had high levels of dropout rates among the older population, that is very significantly related to the dropout rates of the youth, 16 to 24 years of age. In the workforce, I've done some work on looking at the role that Latinos are playing in terms of the changing workforce. Some work with the National Association of Latinos Community and Asset Builders here in San Antonio, national organization headquartered here. I recently did some work for the city of San Antonio that was on the status of women in San Antonio, and looked at issues having to do with gender, the gender gap, wage gap, and some very interesting findings, also very alarming in the extent to which you have high levels of death of women at the hands of intimate partners. Some work also on the opportunity youth, which are persons 16 to 24 years of age who are neither working or neither in school. And then more recently, looking at the workforce, the Latino workforce in the coronavirus era. And in particular, we're seeing that a lot of the essential workers are Latinos, particularly immigrants. In the areas of health, I've looked at, with a colleague at UNAM in Mexico City, looking at the aging of Mexican immigrants that originated from the Mexican states of Zacatecas and Guanajuato, those that returned, how they're dealing with their health issues in their older ages, and those that stayed in the United States. So we did some work, interview work in LA, in Dallas, and in Chicago. And then working on the epidemiological paradox where Latinos, despite being poor, high levels of non-insurance, working in more dangerous jobs and so forth, that we tend to have low levels of mortality and long life expectancy, even more than whites. So I'm doing some work in that area. And then more recently, just published on Monday with Latino Decisions, where I compiled data from different state portals with the COVID-19 and looking at cases and deaths and the representation of Latinos in those cases and COVID-19 deaths. And then the next slide here is how I've connected faculty work with applied policy research, a variety in the past, probably about 10, 15 years ago, when there was a lot of issues, a lot of concern that there was going to likely be immigration policy reform that was taking place. The American Sociological Association put together a team that provided information to policymakers in Washington, D.C. on issues having to do with immigration. Then with the Population Reference Bureau, I wrote for PBR, that's where my mind is right now. I guess not the Pabst Blue Ribbon, but the Population Reference Bureau on issues having to do with population trends, as well as policy issues. And I wrote for them for about 5 years. And then some work on lawsuits also. Was working with the Texas Black Legislative Caucus, looking at Texas redistricting, which is still in the courts right now, back from work that was done in 2011, and then other lawsuits as well. And then I've written a number, probably about 100 or so op-eds throughout the country, a lot having to do with public policy issues, issues having to do with inequality in the Latino population, immigration, and so forth. And then in 2017, 2018, Ahora Sí, which was the Spanish language newspaper of the Austin Statesman, invited me to do a monthly column on some of these issues having to do with policy, the growth of the Latino population, and so forth. And more recently, I've worked with a colleague at UTSA and someone from the community that does work with nonprofits on the development of the Texas Latino Policy Symposium, which for the past 2 years, and then we hope to also do it, our third annual one in October, depending on how what that future is. And we bring in together activists, people working in nonprofit organizations, and then researchers dealing with the major issues affecting the Latino population. And then some of the current work, I serve on the board of the Academia America here in San Antonio, which is an organization run by Mario Compián, former Raza Unida gubernatorial candidate here in Texas. And Mario does work, the organization prepares immigrants to take the citizenship classes to get their citizenship, what they need to do to prepare for the exams that they will take. Catch the Next, which works with community colleges, looking with preparing students as well as empowering them to succeed, to finish their two-year degrees, and then also to transfer to the four-year institutions. And then also with the Greater Dallas Legal and Community Development Foundation, which is run by Jose Angel Gutierrez, another former Raza Unida individual. And then some work, collaborative work with IDRA here in San Antonio, which is a premier organization on education, K through 12 education policy, with the National Association for Latino Community and Asset Builders, NALCAB. And about 6 months ago, they invited me to do a monthly research brief to change the narrative on Latinos from the kind of the Trump kind of rapists that we're here taking jobs and so forth, and all the great things that Latinos are doing with respect to their impact on the economy, the job growth rate, and so forth. Some work also with the Southwest Voter Registration and Education Research Project, and they do an annual a series of about 2-3 times a year where they bring in people who are considering running for office, and they train them all the things that they need to do. And they usually bring me in to talk about the demographic issues and some of the primary policy issues so that they're prepared when they get off the run, when they start campaigning and so forth.
So I'm going to have to break in here because
Okay.
we want to make sure we have plenty of time. So I really want to thank you, Dr. Sines, for not only your presentation, but all the work that you've been doing in the San Antonio community and much wider than that over the years. So now it's question time. So if you would write some questions in the chat that you might have for any of our speakers, or about the Pipeline Partnership Program, or about how your research might fit with AIR, please feel free to start putting some questions in the chat. And I see that El Hakim Ibrahim has a question, and I wonder if you can write your question in the chat. Or at least that he was raising his hand.
So can I just, some of the questions that were submitted a priori, I think there's one that's quite interesting that deals with what David was raising at the outset. What opportunities can there be for data-driven people with these topics of interest? Well, you can see that serendipity can play its way out. You can imagine the possible selves and further training that's needed. I didn't have the training I needed to start, but you start asking questions, and if you're curious, and everybody that wrote some of these questions, you can see that there's a lot of curiosity that's ready to unfold. And it's hard to envision until you actually go there. And that's what the advantages of the Pipeline program is, to help you envision ways that you can approach the work that you're currently doing in a way that can directly connect you with the policy outcome, rather than saying, here it is, further research is needed and policymakers should, because that kind of normative approach won't go anywhere unless there's a direct connection, and AIR has the connections. First, because they're located in Washington, D.C. Second, because they have a network of different organizations they work with. And third, because they have a lot of experience and commitment to actually translate evidence and findings into action. So it's difficult to envision this until you actually start doing it. And that's why we're trying to do this Pipeline Partnership Program through AIR.
Thank you so much. So we have a question from Francine Johnson. Thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us today. I am focused on improving educational outcomes for high school English learners. I am wondering if AIR or some of these other organizations value qualitative or mixed methods studies.
Yeah, so let me jump in there. And that's actually one of the slides that I didn't cover because I was running short on time. But yes, we see qualitative work generating data just like quantitative work. It's collected in a different way, and sometimes it's synthesized in different ways as well. And we find more and more that there is the call for mixed methods research that's going on. Often it paints a picture for you that you can't capture with quantitative data. So yes, we do it. So if you see in the lower left box there that Juliet just put up, we do apply both quantitative and qualitative methods in our work. We do meta-analyses, systematic reviews, all kinds of this work. So yes, there is a place for that, very much so.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from Elise Britton. How are AIR projects supported? What are the funding sources?
Right. So really there, and this is something that's, I think, somewhat unique about AIR. There are one or two other, I shouldn't say unique, but there are a few organizations that behave this way. As I said, mission is critical for AIR. That's what drives everything. And we see two paths to accomplishing mission. One is through our client-based work. And so that refers to work where the client, being often the federal government, a state government, or a foundation, poses a question, and AIR figures out a solution to it. And that is the bulk of our work. So US Department of Education, Department of Labor, it can be the Food and Nutrition Service, it can be the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services. These are all funders of our work. As I mentioned, I think a little while ago, foundations sometimes also fund our work. The other path for AIR to accomplishing mission is to self-fund its own work. And our view is, and we behave in some ways like a foundation when we think about this kind of work, and Tracy Gray's been heavily involved in this for the past few years with me, is AIR has some of its own resources. We have basically an endowment. That endowment allows us to pursue topics that others aren't pursuing, but we think should be pursued. And so, you know, we've done work for the last 3 or 4 years around children age 0 to 3, and we've taken on a number of topics within that. As we go forward, 2 of the topics that we're starting to look at, and it's exploratory at this point, one is around residential and school segregation, not documenting that there is segregation and that it has negative consequences, but are there ways of mitigating the effects of segregation, particularly in terms of educational and workforce outcomes? The other topic that we're working on is around workforce development itself, and particularly interventions there that have been tested, and for one reason or another, maybe they haven't been replicated enough, for example, to how to scale them up to make them so that they are available to a much broader population. So those are 2 avenues that we think of. It's the client-focused work and our own funded work.
Thank you very much. So we have a question from Ibrahim Al-Hakim. Is there a chance for an international graduate student to be a part of this pipeline program? Also, is research based on African data sources of interest to AIR?
Yes and yes. We don't have to live with any federal criteria or anybody else's criteria about who participates in our program. So I don't see any challenges there in terms of participation in it. But it's a very good question. In terms of African work in Africa, a fair amount of our work that's internationally based is out of Africa. We've done a number of randomized control trials in sub-Saharan Africa. We've had a strong presence in Zambia. As a matter of fact, in Zambia right now, we are partnering with a group called the Impact Network. And the idea is, how do you take a community school and make it a much more effective school with very limited resources? And what we've done there is partnering with this organization. They've taken what is a community school, they've provided tablets, solar panels, they've made the teachers, they've given them more professional training. There's a lot of monitoring of teachers. There's strong effort around curriculum development and instructional practice for teachers in these community schools. And part of this is we're actually doing a randomized control trial to understand how much more effective this approach is than what a community school would be. It's a long-term project. We've literally invested millions of dollars in it at this point. The good news is that the midline results show that the children that participate in this, in the randomized control trial, have higher reading and math scores than they would have if they had participated in a regular community school.
Thank you very much. I have a question from Dr. Anne Marie Ryan, and she is the department chair of the Department of Instructional Learning and Interdisciplinary Learning and Teaching. Can you say more about the training and workshop opportunities that you mentioned might happen? Who would be able to attend, and what would the outcome of those sessions be?
Well, I can give you one example. So Larry Hedges is probably one of the foremost statisticians in the world. I think Marta would probably agree with me on this.
Absolutely.
And Larry has been an AIR fellow for a number of years now. He offers workshops that are funded by the Institutes of Education Sciences every summer. We'll have to see what happens this summer. And it's around the design and analysis of randomized control trials. Larry has suggested that one of the workshops that could be offered, if the university feels that it's appropriate and needed, could offer the workshop. And we would cover the cost of participating in that workshop for the students who come from the university that want to attend and that are part of this program. There are other workshops too. I mean, this is, and I see the next question is, how will this evolve? It really is working as partners with the departments to figure out what are the necessary, what's necessary, and what can most benefit the students and the department. And so that would be one example. I've hoped that people like Marta and others could offer seminars, maybe even perhaps participate on committees. We have to see where it goes.
Yeah, and I would add that Larry Hedges also does exemplary work on meta-analysis, where they do syntheses of all the research. So there's a lot of work, a lot of interest in bilingual education. There have been all these small little studies here and there, different samples, different places, different variables. He is an expert in synthesizing that and saying, what does this all amount to? And so that would be an area that could really cross-cut many of the disciplines and the interests of the faculty, departments, and graduate students at UTSA.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I noticed one of the questions even posed earlier that we received is, would meta-analysis be part of this? AIR does do quite a bit of meta-analysis and systematic reviews, and we could get Larry or one of his colleagues possibly to offer a course if that's needed.
Yeah, so I would just like to echo this, that we really see very much this pipeline partnership as a collaborative effort where we explore what really are, the types of research areas and types of research development that can be beneficial both for, well, ultimately for the communities that we work in, but in particular for graduate students as they're developing their careers, but also for faculty members who want to become involved in different kinds of joint research projects, or to develop some of their own levels of expertise in areas that they may not have had the time and the abilities to do so. We have a group of individuals who've been working on the partnership for a while, and we're looking for a few more faculty members from different departments who would also start to participate in the shaping of the next steps. In a concrete sort of a sense, we have a plan that our next event would take place, whether it be virtually or face-to-face in some way at the UTSA campus, sometime during the fall semester. I see that we have another question that has come in. What is from Muntashir Masum, excuse me if I'm pronouncing people's names wrong. What is AIR's expectation from new recruits like us in terms of involvement?
It's a great question. I mean, there is the expectation about engagement in courses, workshops, seminars at the university. And then the goal is that we are offering an internship program, and a number of students each year will have an opportunity to participate in it. It is a paid internship. And the goal is to come to an AIR office. We have one in Austin, for example. We have them in Chicago, Seattle, in the San Francisco Bay Area, Washington, DC as well. And to spend the summer working on one or more projects. And this could go on for a number of years. So it's to give you that, it's to be that bridge really, so that you can see what are some of the opportunities that are available and the kinds of skills that you'll need as you come out into the applied market. Okay,
I have another question here that came from what people had submitted along with their names. I have a very limited idea about my skills, about how my skills in research design and statistics would apply in a non-academic setting. I'm not even sure how to look for career opportunities. Should I be searching for positions for data analysis, statistics, or a statistician, or something else?
That's a really good question. It's a tough question.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, and I think Marta's alluded to this as well. When I came out of graduate school, I have to tell you, like a lot of graduate students, PhD students, I thought I was, top dog. I realized pretty quickly what I had is a set of foundational skills that I could build on and then learn. And I learned as I went along, and I saw the needs in terms of statistics, methods, and in terms of content. In terms of looking for positions in the applied setting, most of the organizations recruit through, for example, the American Educational Research Association, the Society for Research on Educational Effectiveness, the American Economics Association, American Sociological Association. We use those as avenues to identify people, to interview them. And I think, participating in this, you'll get a good sense of where your skill set stacks up in terms of what's needed, because you'll be able to interact with people like Marta, who I think has a tremendous sense of the kinds of skills that people need to develop over time. And again, it's very much a learning opportunity, because your skills do need to develop and evolve. Things change.
Yeah.
And I think, the applied setting, you're going to get a lot of opportunity to test your skills out. Marta, do you want to comment on that?
I will confess another thing about me. When I started as an assistant professor at Madison, I was auditing every semester one course in research methods, because I made it through grad school quickly, but I didn't have the depth either substantively or analytically. So it's never too late to learn. And I wasn't proud. I moved there with the graduate students because I could learn. And then other people started doing the same thing. They started auditing other faculty members' courses. So learning is a lifelong expedition. And today I got an email. The William T. Grant Foundation is recruiting somebody. They're recruiting a more seasoned researcher to be part of their grant portfolio manager. But these opportunities emerge gradually. So you have to acquire experience sometime, and an internship is one of the best ways to acquire experience, because then you begin to see on the ground. You learn the theory and the ideas in the classroom, but when you get on the ground, as many of you know, that's when the rubber hits the road, where you start beginning to say, wait a minute, this is a good idea, but it may not work here, and this is what we need to change and how we need to change it. Does it really work? Theoretically, it might, but on the ground, when you roll up your sleeves, it may not. And that's where applied research, which is my passion, really becomes to fruition. But it's a two-way street, and it's a gradual process. You can't see it all as a graduate student. If you had told me I was not going to be a professor of literature when I first started graduate school, I would say, yeah, right. Well, look what happened. So just let it happen. But at least these kinds of opportunities are the ones that begin to broaden the platform, the arena within which you can think about your particular interests and how they can be executed.
Okay, I've got another question from Josh Anzoldua. What does the mentoring program model look like for doctoral students who might partner with AIR?
So the mentoring program, I mean, again, this is evolving. It's possible that one of the external fellows could take on a mentoring role. It's possible that one of our internal fellows, which are full-time staff at AIR, or one of our other senior staff, could work as a mentor. And I'm going to let Karen, you're still on, Karen Francis. I hope you come off mute. Karen can tell you about our mentoring program, which I think is quite unusual for an organization like AIR. So Karen, can you come on and describe our mentoring program that we're running right now?
Yes, so certainly. So thank you, David. So we currently have a mentoring of what we call a reciprocal mentoring program at AIR that brings together our senior leadership staff along to partner with, our staff that we call are between the levels 4 through 6. So those are some of our junior level or mid-level staff, and they come together to form what we call these reciprocal partnerships, where they meet regularly to talk about some of the concerns, issues, ideas around career development, leadership, particular interests as it relates to to a focus on particular content areas. And what this mentoring program is all about is, again, about a shared experience between a senior leader and staff to learn and to grow, and to learn about some of the challenges, but then also to learn about what does success look like for each of the members. So we've had, this program is the first that we've done at AIR. It's a 12-month program where we ask that mentoring partners meet on a monthly basis, or as often or as regularly as they feel that they need to, but really about that shared experience around professional growth and development.
I would also say it's like a postdoc where you have a supervisory, and let me be real honest, postdocs are two-way streets. I have learned so much from my postdocs. How do you think I got involved with this adolescent romantic relationship? It was my last postdoc, who's now an assistant professor at UC Irvine. So there's a give and take in this process, and that's what's really remarkable about this pipeline, is that it allows for that process to unfold within the context of an institution that is very mission-driven and applied.
Right.
So we wanted to respect everybody's time. It's 7:01. So I want to thank all of you for participating. We have copied the questions that haven't been addressed during our time together. And so we'll be directing some of those answers to you by email offline. Dr. Saenz, I don't know if you would like to have a final word. You're on mute.
Yeah, that this is a wonderful opportunity for our students here at UTSA, and very much also for our colleagues, faculty, to get involved, and we really appreciate the opportunity to partner with AIR on this very, very important project.
Thank you very much. And then Dr. Tienda, do you have a final comment?
No, thank you all. As I said, learning is a lifelong expedition, and I'm happy to learn and looking forward to learning with you.
And then Dr. Myers.
Yeah, great. Thank you. One is, we so appreciate UTSA joining with us in this partnership. I mean, we couldn't have asked for more. I'm really excited about, as Marta said, it's a two-way street. We'll benefit, and I hope the students benefit from this. And this is really a first-time effort for us, and we want to be very responsive.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody, for participating. As I mentioned, we will make copies of all the questions that we didn't get to today, and I wish you all a pleasant evening in whatever time zone you might be. And we'll be back in touch with next steps and more really engaging conversations.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.